The garage smelled of cold concrete and machine oil. The kind of smell that accumulates over years of quiet, unhurried work. Victoria Hale, CEO of Hale Dynamics and worth by the most conservative estimates $4.3 billion, stood at its entrance in a cream cashmere coat and looked at everything inside it with awed contempt. This, she said to the camera crew trailing her, is worthless. Every single piece of it. She did not know that the man wiping his hands on a shop rag in the corner had designed the load-bearing architecture for three of the most commercially successful precision components in her own industry's history. She did not know that the logbook on the pegboard behind him contained 14 years' of documented iterations that predated her company's flagship patent by nearly 2 years. At the doorway, a girl of 7 stood holding a stuffed rabbit by one ear, watching her father's face for a signal that everything was fine. Marcus Webb, no relation to Hale, a fact that would later strike lawyers as almost literary, gave his daughter Mia a small nod. Everything was done. What happened next took 11 months, and it began with a logbook. Marcus had been, for 11 years before the garage, a principal engineer at Meridian Fabrication Group, a mid-sized precision manufacturing firm whose components ended up inside equipment that larger companies sold under their own names. He was not famous for this. He had not wanted to be. What he had wanted in those years was to solve problems that other engineers declared unsolvable, and he had done that with a consistency that his former supervisor, a methodical Scotsman named Alistair Broom, once described as almost unreasonable. Marcus had taken that as a compliment. Claire had understood that about him. She had understood most things about him, which was, he had told her once, the most disorienting experience of his adult life. She had laughed at that. She laughed easily, and the garage still held the ghost of it in small ways. In the coffee-stained edge of the workbench where she used to sit on Saturday mornings, mug in hand, watching him work and asking questions that were never as simple as they sounded. She died on a Tuesday in March, 3 years before Victoria Hale's camera crew appeared at the garage entrance, from a cardiac event that the attending physician described as sudden and unsurvivable. Mia had been 4. Marcus had been 39. He had handed in his notice at Meridian the following month, not in grief's first chaos, but in its cold, clarifying aftermath. He had done the arithmetic. 2 parents, 1 high-demand career, 1 child who had already lost half her world. The math resolved cleanly. He opened the repair shop in the garage, took on small contracts, industrial calibration, prototype assembly for local startups, and arranged his hours around school drop-off and pickup with the same precision he had once applied to load tolerance calculations. The logbook had been Claire's idea, originally. She had been a technical librarian, and she believed with a quiet ferocity Marcus had always admired. That undocumented knowledge was knowledge already half lost. The current logbook, a cloth-bound A4 journal with a cracked spine and a water stain on the cover, sat on the pegboard above the main bench. It contained in Marcus's small, unhurried handwriting every significant design decision, every material substitution, every iteration date, every test result, going back to a component family he had begun developing privately in the final years at Meridian, work he had done on his own time, with his own materials, a distinction his employment contract had been careful to preserve. He did not know, the morning Victoria Hale arrived, that her company had filed a patent 18 months earlier on a component architecture that bore a structural resemblance to his own documented work that was, in the language a patent examiner would later use, non-trivial. Hale arrived with 3 people, a camera operator, a producer, and her COO, a compact, watchful man named Denton Cray, who wore the expression of someone perpetually calculating the shortest distance between 2 points. Hale looked at the logbook on the pegboard and said, "To no one in particular, is that a diary?" She said it with a small, precise smile. Denton Cray did not smile. He looked at the logbook for a moment longer than the question required, and then he looked away. The camera operator filmed the cracked concrete floor. Hale said the word "worthless," and the crew packed up, and they left. Mia came inside afterward and stood beside her father at the bench. "She didn't look at anything," Mia said. "No," Marcus said. "Why not?" He thought about that for a moment. "Some people look at a room and see what isn't there," he said. She saw an empty room. Mia considered this with the seriousness she brought to most things and went back to her book. 3 weeks later, Marcus received a legal letter. Hale Dynamics was asserting that a component design he had licensed to a regional manufacturer infringed on their recently filed patent. The letter was 14 pages long and written in the kind of language designed to make the recipient feel that resistance was not only futile, but slightly embarrassing. Marcus read it twice, set it on the workbench, and went to get the logbook. He reached Ray Okafor the next morning. Ray was a former colleague from Meridian, now freelance, who had the particular gift of being able to hold a complex technical argument in his head for hours without losing the thread. He arrived at the garage that afternoon with a thermos of coffee and the expression of a man who had been waiting for an interesting problem. They worked for 14 days, methodical and unhurried, spread across 3 weeks, because Marcus still had contracts to fulfill, and Mia still needed collecting from school at 3:30. Marcus pulled every dated entry from the logbook that touched the disputed component family. Ray cross-referenced them against the Hale patent's priority date, building a timeline in a shared document that grew, by the end of the second week, to 63 entries. Each entry had a date, a description, a material specification, and in most cases, a small annotated sketch in the margin. The earliest relevant entry was dated 4 years before Hale Dynamics had been incorporated as a company. On the 11th day, Mia came into the garage after school and looked at the timeline on Ray's laptop. "What's all that?" she asked. "Evidence," Ray said. Of what? That your dad made something first. Mia looked at the screen, then at her father. You made it first, she said, as though confirming something she had already known. Yes, Marcus said. She nodded and went to get her homework. Marcus packaged the logbook, a certified copy of his Meridian employment contract confirming the personal time carve-out, and Ray's 63-entry timeline, and sent them by recorded delivery to a patent examiner at the relevant intellectual property authority. The examiner's letter arrived 6 weeks later. It confirmed in formal and careful language that the documented prior art predated the priority date of the Hale Dynamics patent by a margin sufficient to invalidate the patent's claim over the disputed component architecture. Denton Cray called Marcus's phone the afternoon the examiner's letter entered the public registry. Marcus did not answer. He was at school pickup, standing in the line of parents outside the low brick building. And when Mia came through the double doors with her backpack bouncing and her rabbit tucked under one arm, he caught her the way he always did. He did not yet know that Cray's call was the first of several, and that each one would carry a slightly different quality of urgency. Marcus had built the component at the center of the next dispute himself, by hand, over 8 months, in the last year at Meridian. A precision coupling assembly, roughly the size of a fist, machined from a proprietary alloy specification he had developed through iterations so gradual and so thoroughly documented that the logbook entries for that period read less like notes and more like a correspondence with a problem that was slowly agreeing to be solved. He had named the alloy in his notes by a shorthand Claire had suggested, a small private joke that meant nothing to anyone outside the two of them, and that appeared in the logbook with a consistency that would later matter enormously. He did not know, when Hale's camera crew walked through the garage, that Denton Cray had paused for 3 seconds in front of the component where it sat on the corner of the bench, partially wrapped in cloth, and had taken a photograph with his phone. He did not know that Cray had sent the photograph to a materials engineer at Hale Dynamics that same evening, or that the engineer had replied within the hour with a message that Cray would later be required to produce in Discovery. Marcus had been showing the producer where the circuit calibration equipment was stored. The second legal action came through a different channel, not a patent claim, but a trade secret misappropriation allegation, asserting that Marcus had used proprietary Hale Dynamics materials knowledge in the construction of the component. The letter was 12 pages. Marcus read it at the workbench, set it down, and called Ray. Ray arrived the next morning. He looked at the letter, then at the component, then at Marcus. They're claiming they invented the alloy, he said. Yes, Marcus said. When were they founded? After my first logbook entry on the alloy by about 3 years. Ray picked up his thermos. All right, he said. They spent the first 4 days pulling every logbook entry related to the alloy's development, composition ratios, heat treatment cycles, failure modes, the gradual refinements that had taken the material from a promising idea to a reliable specification. They built a chain of custody document, entry by entry, that traced the alloy from its first mention 6 years earlier to the finished component on the bench. On day 6, Marcus contacted Dr. Priya Suresh, a materials science professor at the Regional Technical University, who had published on proprietary alloy development and who agreed, after reviewing the logbook entries, to provide an independent technical assessment. On day 9, Mia stood looking at the component on the bench with the focused attention she gave to things she was trying to understand. "What's that called?" she asked. "It doesn't have an official name," Marcus said. She considered this. "It's Dad's invisible thing," she said, with the certainty of a 7-year-old who has named something and considers the matter settled. Ray, at the laptop, did not look up, but the corner of his mouth moved. They worked for 22 days in total. On day 19, Marcus's attorney submitted a formal response to Hale Dynamics' legal team, attaching the chain of custody document, the certified logbook entries, and Dr. Suresh's full technical report, which concluded that the alloy specification predated any Hale Dynamics internal documentation by a margin that made the misappropriation allegation untenable. On day 22, Dr. Suresh presented her findings at a materials science symposium at the university, not as a legal exhibit, but as a case study in independent parallel development. The presentation was attended by, among others, a journalist covering the precision manufacturing sector and a representative from Arcturus Capital, a venture firm that had recently taken a significant position in Hale Dynamics. The Arcturus representative left the symposium early. He made a call from the parking structure. The call lasted 11 minutes. Denton Cray received a message that afternoon. He read it on his phone while sitting in the Hale Dynamics boardroom, and it caused him to sit very still for a long moment. Then he asked his assistant to clear his afternoon. Victoria Hale, shown Dr. Suresh's report the following morning, said nothing for a full 30 seconds. Then she said, in a voice that had lost its earlier precision, "Who is this man exactly?" It was not the question she had intended to ask. It was the only one she had. Marcus was at the bench when Ray called to tell him. He listened, thanked Ray, set the phone down, and went back to the coupling assembly he had been finishing. Its surface cool and exact under his fingers. Mia had named it correctly, he thought. It had always been invisible to the people who needed it most. The prototype unit had been the first complete assembly Marcus built after leaving Meridian. Not a component, but a full working prototype of a precision measurement device, the kind of instrument that exists in the gap between what a manufacturer needs and what the commercial market has not yet thought to supply. He had built it partly to prove to himself that he still could, and partly because a small aerospace subcontractor had described a measurement problem to him at a trade association meeting, and the problem had stayed with him until he resolved it. The prototype was not elegant. Exposed fasteners, hand-routed cable, a housing machined from plate stock, but it worked with a precision that the subcontractor, when Marcus demonstrated it, described as startling. He had used the word twice. The chassis bore a serial number Marcus had stamped into the housing himself, using a set of second-hand number stamps. The number followed a format he had developed at Meridian for internal prototype tracking, a 2-letter prefix indicating the project family, a 4-digit sequence number, and a date suffix encoding the month and year of first assembly. It was a working engineer's notation, the kind of mark that means nothing to anyone who does not know the system, and everything to anyone who does. He did not know, when Hale's engineers photographed the garage during the documentary visit, that they had not photographed the serial number, because the number was on the underside of the housing, facing the shelf, and the photographer had not thought to look there. He did not know that Hale Dynamics had, in the months following the visit, filed a design registration for a precision measurement device whose architecture their own internal documents would later describe in language a lawyer had not yet reviewed, as inspired by an external source. The third legal action arrived on a Thursday morning. Marcus read it standing at the bench, a pressure transducer still in his left hand, and then he set both down and stood quietly for a moment. Then he turned the prototype over and looked at the serial number stamped into the housing. It was still there. It had always been there. He and Ray worked for 18 evenings, not days, because Marcus's daytime contracts had increased and the income was not optional, from 7 until 10 or 11, with the roller door half down against the cold and the overhead light throwing its yellow warmth across the bench. Ray brought coffee each time. The garage had, in those evenings, a quality of companionable industry that Marcus had not felt since the Meridian years. On the 9th evening, Mia came to the garage doorway and stood looking at the prototype on the bench. "Why does that have numbers on the bottom?" she asked. "So I know when I made it," Marcus said. She thought about this. "Like a birthday," she said. "Exactly like that," he said. She nodded and went back inside. On the 15th evening, Marcus submitted a formal request to the Industry Authentication Board, attaching the prototype, the stamped serial number decoded against his documented format, the logbook entries covering the device's construction, and a signed statement from the aerospace subcontractor. The board's examiner, a retired metrology engineer named Callum Firth, known in the small world of precision instrument authentication, for a thoroughness that some found excessive, requested a personal examination. He spent 2 hours with the prototype, measured, photographed, and decoded the serial number against Marcus's documented format. He said very little. When he was done, he looked at Marcus with the expression of a man who has confirmed something he already suspected. "The stamp is consistent with the date we suggest," he said. The wear pattern on the housing is consistent with the logbook timeline. The letter arrived in 8 days. It confirmed that the prototype, as identified by its chassis serial number, had been assembled at a date that preceded the Hale Dynamics design registration by 27 months. A copy of the letter entered the record of a due diligence process being conducted by a private equity firm considering a major investment in Hale Dynamics. The due diligence team found the letter, flagged it, and also found that Denton Cray had personally overseen the design registration filing, and that the internal document describing the prototype's architecture as inspired by an external source had not been disclosed in the registration application. Cray's competing venture, a side project he had been developing quietly using Hale Dynamics resources and the design registration as a foundation, collapsed within a week of the due diligence finding. He did not announce this. It simply stopped. He signed a separation agreement with Hale Dynamics on a Thursday afternoon, in a conference room with his attorney, and when it was done, he sat for a long moment, looking at nothing in particular, and then he gathered his things and left the building without speaking to anyone. The flat file cabinet in the corner of the garage had been Claire's. Originally, a 4-drawer steel unit she had used in her library work to store oversized documents. Marcus had filled it over the years with hand-drafted technical drawings on cartridge paper, done in pencil and ink with the drafting instruments he had used since his second year of engineering study. Every line a decision, every dimension a commitment. The drawings spanned 12 years of work, and the earliest, filed at the back of the bottom drawer under a sheet of glycine, was a full assembly drawing for a modular drive system Marcus had developed over 8 months in the final years at Meridian, a design that bore in its fundamental architecture a relationship to the drive system at the core of Hale Dynamics' flagship product line that a rival investor's due diligence team would later describe in a report that would become consequential as foundational. He did not know. The morning Hale's camera crew walked through the garage that the flat file cabinet was visible in 2 of the shots the camera operator had taken. He did not know that a rival investor's due diligence team had, in the course of investigating Hale Dynamics' IP provenance, traced the drive system architecture back through the patent record and found a gap, a period before the earliest Hale filing, during which the architecture appeared, in the examiner's language, to have existed without a documented originator. The fourth legal matter was not a letter. It was a phone call from an attorney representing Vantage Bridge Partners, a private investment group conducting due diligence on Hale Dynamics in connection with a proposed acquisition. The attorney asked carefully whether Marcus Webb had any documentation of design work predating Hale Dynamics' earliest drive system filing. Marcus said he would need to check his files. He thanked the attorney and ended the call. Then he went to the flat file cabinet and opened the bottom drawer. Ray came the following afternoon. He stood at the cabinet and looked at the drawing Marcus had pulled. The full assembly, pencil, and ink on cartridge paper, dated in Marcus's handwriting, in the title block, with the Meridian personal hours notation in the revision history, and a small annotation in the corner that Ray read twice before he said anything. "Is that Claire's handwriting?" he asked. "She used to check my title blocks," Marcus said. "She said engineers couldn't be trusted to spell their own names correctly." Ray looked at the annotation for a moment. Then he looked at Marcus. "All right," he said. "Let's count the drawings." There were 31 relevant drawings in the cabinet. They worked for 31 days, 1 day per drawing. A coincidence, Marcus noted without comment. Building an authenticated reproduction set, each original photographed under controlled lighting, measured, annotated with its position in the development sequence, and cross-referenced against the logbook entries for the corresponding design period. On the 16th day, Mia came into the garage after school and stood looking at the drawing spread across the bench, large enough that it overlapped the edges. She leaned in close, the way she did when she was looking for something specific, and then she pointed to the corner of the sheet. "That's Mom's writing," she said. "Yes," Marcus said. "Why does it have a coffee ring on it?" "She used to sit at the bench when I was working," he said. She put her mug down. Mia looked at the ring for a moment. A pale circle, faint but permanent, in the upper right corner of the sheet. Then she went to her stool and got out her homework, and the garage was quiet again except for the sound of Ray's pencil and the occasional tick of the fluorescent light. On the 28th day, Marcus submitted the full authenticated reproduction set, along with the original drawings, to Dr. Adaeze Nwachukwu, a forensic document examiner who specialized in technical document authentication and who had examined engineering drawings in connection with IP disputes on 4 continents. Her report, delivered on the 31st day, was 42 pages long. Its conclusion occupied 1 paragraph. The drawings were authentic. The earliest was dated 3 years and 4 months before Hale Dynamics' first drive system patent filing. The authorship, as documented in the title blocks and confirmed by the handwriting annotation, was Marcus Webb's. The Vantage Bridge Partners Acquisition Committee placed the Hale Dynamics deal on hold pending a full review of the company's design provenance. Victoria Hale called Marcus's phone the evening the hold was announced. He was in the kitchen washing up after dinner, and Mia was at the table drawing with her colored pencils, her rabbit propped against the fruit bowl. He dried his hands and answered. Hale's voice had changed register entirely from the woman who had stood at the garage entrance in her cashmere coat and said the word worthless. It was quieter, slower, carrying the sound of someone who has, for the numbers, and found they do not add up in the direction expected. She said she believed Marcus's contributions had been significantly underappreciated. She said she would like to discuss a formal licensing arrangement. She said she hoped he understood that the legal actions had been pursued in good faith on the basis of information that had since proved incomplete. Marcus listened to all of this. When she finished, he said that he would have his attorney contact hers. He said it without heat and without satisfaction, in the same tone he used when confirming a delivery schedule with a client. Then he thanked her for calling and ended the call. Mia looked up from her drawing. Who was that? Someone who needed to talk, Marcus said. She went back to her drawing. The fifth thing Marcus had never talked about was the people. Not the drawings, not the logbook, not the components, not the serial number hidden in the casting. The people were the quietest layer of all, and they were also the deepest. The kind of relationships that do not announce themselves at dinner parties or appear on organizational charts, that live instead in the memory of old machinists who remember who showed up on time and who did not, in the notebooks of procurement managers who have been burned once and will not be burned again. Marcus had spent 11 years building those relationships before Claire died, and in the years since he had done nothing to cultivate them and nothing to dissolve them. He had simply continued to be the person those people remembered. That was enough. He did not know, on the morning the first car pulled into the drive, that the week about to unfold would be described in 3 separate trade publications as the fastest validated asset transfer in the sector's recent history. What he knew was that Mia had left her rabbit on the workbench again, propped against the base of the lamp with its ears folded forward, and that he had moved it carefully to the shelf before the car arrived. The car belonged to Dennis Farrow, a former regional distribution director who now ran his own logistics consultancy and who had not spoken to Marcus in 8 months. Not since a brief exchange at an industry luncheon where Marcus had said almost nothing, and Dennis had said he was keeping his ear to the ground. When the clip of Victoria Hale standing in the garage doorway and saying worthless had circulated across 3 industry forums and 2 financial news aggregators, Dennis had made 6 calls in a single evening. By the following morning, Marcus had received 4 messages from people he had not spoken to in years. By the afternoon, 11. By day 3, Consolidated Meridian Works, a regional manufacturing partner with production capacity across 2 facilities, had made formal contact. By day 4, Arcturus Capital had requested the full documentation package. By day 5, Hargrove Certified Advisors, an independent auditing firm with no prior relationship to Marcus or any of the parties involved, had been engaged. Marcus spent most of that day at the flat file cabinet, pulling drawings and cross-referencing them against the logbook, while a second colleague, Tomas Reyes, read serial numbers aloud so Marcus could confirm each against the original casting records. Mia came home from school on day 5 with news of her own. Chloe's mom showed her something on her phone, she said, dropping her backpack by the door. It was our garage. Marcus looked up from the logbook. It was on the news, Mia said. Chloe said the lady was laughing at it. Marcus set down his pencil. Some people look at something and see what it is right now, he said. Some people look at the same thing and see what it's worth. Mia thought about this. She picked up the rabbit from the shelf and held it against her chest. Which one are you? She asked. I'm still learning, Marcus said. She went inside. Tomas did not say anything, which was the right thing to do. The Hargrove Certified Advisor's report arrived on day 7. It placed the assessed value of the consolidated asset package, the documented intellectual property, the proprietary component inventory, the design archive, and the established manufacturing relationships at $40 million. Not a projection, not a speculative valuation based on future earnings. A present tense procurement-supported figure attached to a signed certificate that Marcus folded once and placed in the top drawer of the flat file cabinet. The same outlets that had circulated Victoria Hale's clip now ran the certification number alongside it. The framing changed without anyone having to argue for the change. The number did the work. Marcus drove home on a Tuesday night with the windows down because the air had finally turned, the way it does in early October when the heat breaks without warning and the evening carries the first real suggestion of cold. The garage light was still on when he turned onto Delmar Street. He had left it that way on purpose. Years ago, when Mia was small enough to be frightened by the dark and old enough to know that a light meant someone was coming back, he had never stopped leaving it on. It had become the kind of habit that outlasts its original reason and becomes something else, something closer to a promise. Inside, Mia was asleep on the couch, with the rabbit tucked under her arm, one ear bent against the cushion, the other pointing straight up. A blanket had been pulled halfway over her, which meant she had been awake long enough to get cold, and not awake long enough to do it properly. Marcus turned the television off and straightened the blanket and stood there for a moment in the quiet. He did not think about the certification number. He did not think about Victoria Hale's changed voice, or the trade publications, or the calls that had come in over 7 days from people who remembered who he was. He thought about Mia's question at the workbench. Which one are you? He thought about the answer he had given, the honest one, the one that had cost him nothing to say, because it was simply true. The garage was still on outside. He could see it through the kitchen window, a thin yellow line under the door, the same light that had been burning in one form or another since the night he had moved the workbench in and decided that this was what the next chapter looked like. Not a retreat, not a diminishment, a different kind of precision applied to a different kind of problem. Claire had understood that before he had. She had told him once, sitting in the driveway of the house they had not yet sold, that the most skilled thing a person could do was know what they were actually looking at, not what they expected to see, not what they had been told to see, what was actually there. He had been learning that ever since. The light in the garage did not mean the work was unfinished. It meant the work was known and tended, and would be there in the morning. That is what disciplined looking does. Quietly and without announcement, it stays. Marcus turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. The garage light stayed on a little longer, the way it always did.